It was 22 years ago this fall that the Plattsburgh Air Force Base closed. It was one of the most historic days in recent memory here in the North Country. Hundreds gathered on the base oval on a sunny day in late September of 1995 for the ceremony marking the end of 40 years as a Strategic Air Command bomber base and air refueling wing. With the end of the Cold War, the Department of Defense closed more than 300 military installations in the late 80s and 1990s, including Plattsburgh, even though top Air Force brass wanted the air base to remain open. And it ended a much longer military history for the base, dating back nearly 200 years. Much of that history, including hundreds of photographs, are in a new book called The Plattsburgh Military Reservation, a pictorial history, written by two of the area's best-known and respected historians. And the authors of that new book are with us this week, Dr. Rich Frost and Melissa Peck. Welcome, nice to have you both here.
Thanks for having us.
You two teamed up to write this book about the history of the Plattsburgh Air Force Base. Now this goes back well before the days of the Air Force Base here in Plattsburgh, which it was for about 50 years. This goes back to the early 1800s, after the War of 1812. That's how far back the history of this base dates.
Yeah, we actually decided it goes all the way back to 1813 when they first decided to build some forts here to protect the city of Plattsburgh.
That was in the midst of the War of 1812.
This was an important northern city, and there was expectation it was going to be an invasion down here. I can tell you that when the Battle of Plattsburgh began, work on the forts was still going on feverishly. They were working on it even as they were trying to defend them.
And so after the War of 1812, did they continue to use that base?
Yes. The base was pretty continually manned by the Army from the War of 1812 through to 1945. Then there was a break, and then the Air Force came in the early to mid-1950s.
And a lot of the pictures in the book, and that's the great thing about this book, is there are so many wonderful pictures, just a wealth of historical photos.
And a lot of the photos that we had from the book were from the collection of the Clinton County Historical Association. So they have an amazing collection of glass plate negatives. I worked with volunteers, Roger Black, Vicki Evans, a lot of volunteers at the museums to see those scanned, digitized, and made available for this book. So we really wanted to do something to help promote the collection and promote just the amazing history there at the old base.
Was the base at all active during the Civil War?
It was used to muster in troops that were being recruited. So I would argue that for the most part, the base was active. They may not have been training troops every day that were going to war.
And then as we get into World War I, this is where we have heard of the Plattsburgh idea. And tell us what the Plattsburgh idea was.
There were certain people in the Army, most important of which was Leonard Wood, who was an Army surgeon, who was actually a physician by training, but was a career member of both the medical corps and became went up the ranks till he became a general. He believed that this country was not prepared in case it got drawn into a European war. He really made the case for preparedness, needing to train citizens to be ready in case we had to go send troops to Europe. And his key ally was somebody he fought with in the Spanish-American War in Cuba, and that's former President Teddy Roosevelt, who always believed the country should be ready for war. Wood felt that you could start by training students and start developing a generation of prepared people. And so he supervised college student training camps, and the decision was made to do a larger student camp at Plattsburgh in 1915. That's from where the Plattsburgh idea sort of sprung up, and Plattsburgh became sort of synonymous with the idea of citizens getting training to be prepared should the country be drawn into combat. And it's estimated that a good 25 to 35,000 officers were trained in Plattsburgh plans, many of them here.
The book has some wonderful pictures from that era of the trains arriving and just lines of recruits getting on and off the trains, and that really added to this book, just the photos you were able to find.
Oh, absolutely. For me personally, we had always heard about the Air Force Base, that's in our most immediate past. But in discovering all of these photos, there was an incredible Army history here. I mean, and those photographs really brought that to life.
Among the photographs, Teddy Roosevelt came for a visit.
Teddy Roosevelt came and visited a lot. He really liked the area, but also he had 4 kids in college. They all came to the training camps. And McKinley went over to the base frequently. The troops did drills for him. The Army band entertained his party frequently.
In fact, there's that photograph of them
Yep.
sitting on the porch of one of the brownstones over on the Oval.
Right, right.
For one of those performances. And you talk in the book how there was actually an era before the Air Force came in the 50s where there was a naval base here, and I don't think a lot of people know about this part of the base's history.
That was 1944, I believe, and I think it was just one summer where there was Camp McDonough, so there was some Navy training here, and it didn't last long, but it's just one of the parts of this incredible history.
And so that was just 1 year for the Navy.
It was 1 year.
Was it budget cuts, or any idea why it only lasted a year?
War was coming to an end, and they didn't need to continue training. I think by the end of 44, they figured they didn't need to train so many more officers. When it opened, it stunned the public. I mean, all of a sudden, there's a headline in the paper that Plattsburgh Barracks is being closed, and in its place tomorrow morning will be Camp McDonough, the Naval Training School. So it pretty much stunned people.
And then within a few years, then the Air Force came in the mid-50s.
All of a sudden, in 1953, the Air Force said they wanted a SAC base in the Northeast. And they started looking around Burlington, and they were going to site it in Vermont. And again, Plattsburgh deserves credit. People heard about it and started approaching the Air Force and said, you really ought to look on this side of the lake. The Air Force showed interest, looked over here. They looked at Point of Rush. They looked at the old county airport. They looked at Macomb Reservation, which had already been used for war games in 1939. And the Air Force liked the general area, didn't like any of those locations. Don't ask me why it took them so long to look at the old base.
The book does get into then the Air Force Base history. I mean, there's so much that we've talked about before that, but obviously this was a huge chapter of its history and probably what most people around here know it for. And so you delve into the history of the Air Force Base.
We delved into it some. It's a very impressive history just to the Air Force. I mean, it was a strategic air command base. For a period of time, there were jets out of Plattsburgh in the air 24/7 on alert status. This became the headquarters when a series of deterrent missile silos were built in the region. And obviously, this was on the map across the world during the Cuban Missile Crisis back in the early 60s. And the other thing is, every time there was a technological advance in equipment, whether it be a new plane, whether it be a helicopter, I mean, this place stayed up to date with state-of-the-art equipment.
You don't get into the controversy over the closing and the BRAC Commission deciding to close the base.
I did make an editorial comment about it can be described only as something that was fully political. It had nothing to do with the merits of the operation or the strategic value of the base. It was political. I didn't get into that in huge detail, but I made sure it got mentioned.
When you put out the book, when the book was published, you held a book signing at the Old Stone Barracks. That building, obviously, an important part of the history of this base, and so that was quite fitting that you decided to hold a book signing there.
Yeah, we were really lucky to have the opportunity to release it there. You can see in the book there's some very early pictures of the Old Stone Barracks. It functioned as a barracks, and we have some great pictures of the 21st Infantry sort of drilling out on what were then the parade grounds.
And obviously, just recently, in the past few years, a lot of people were worried about that building. It was in a state of disarray. It was sold to a developer from Montreal. The future was uncertain. Friends of the Old Stone Barracks stepped forward and really helped facilitate getting the current owners in there to create the brew pub that's there, but with the promise that they were going to keep the character of the building, which in in many ways they have, and it still has the look that it always had. So that had to be satisfying to see all of this playing out at the time that you were writing the book.
A lot of people deserve credit for that. There were, I mean, I can't imagine how many people were working behind the scenes. The development that was planned would have hidden that building from view. Interestingly, the developer really wasn't even going to use the building. It was the land that he wanted to build condos and other facilities. So I think the community is extraordinarily fortunate that was saved in the way it was.
And you had a great turnout that day, folks coming out to get their hands on the new book.
We probably sold 50 books. Profits are going to the Clinton County Historical Association. So we're very excited. There was a lot of support for the book.
If they still want copies, where can they get the book?
At the Clinton County Historical Association. They're located at 98 Ohio Avenue in the museum campus. They're being sold exclusively there right now.